Aloha and welcome to Ehana Kako. We're a weekly program on the ThinkTech Hawaii Broadcast Network. I'm Keli'i Akina, president of the Grassroot Institute, and today I'm delighted to have Christine Camp with me. She's the president and CEO of the Avalon Group, a tremendous organization that has brought to Hawaii about $350 million of investment. She knows what she's talking about when it comes to attracting money to Hawaii in order to build a better community, a better environment, and more of the good things in life for us. I want to welcome to our program Christine. Aloha, Christine.
Aloha.
Well, you've got quite a remarkable story from, well, I wouldn't say rags, but from
It's literally rags.
rags to riches. I mean, you built your company, but you've been able after college to work for some great realty and development firms. What was the secret for you? Is it luck? Is it talent?
Well, I just happened to be lucky because my very first job was in real estate development.
Mm-hmm.
And so the opportunity was there for me to work in that field, and I really enjoyed it. I found it to be quite meaningful. So while I was going to college, I was able to mold my education in towards becoming a developer.
So even in school, business has been a part of your life. You went to Hawaii Pacific University.
Right.
What advantages did that give you in terms of being able to craft the future you want?
Right. I attended both University of Hawaii and Hawaii Pacific University, but I ended up graduating with Hawaii Pacific University because University of Hawaii, at that time anyway, didn't have a very robust continuing education for those adult students who are working full-time. Sure. And HPU understood that, and they catered to that market, so they allowed me to finish my degree. And it was a wonderful experience because we had a robust pool of talented business executives who would come after work to teach. And so we had, on-time experience and lecturers.
Did having to work full-time, make a living, and then get your education give you greater value of your education? Did you put more into it as a result?
I certainly did, because every day, as you become more experienced in working environment, you realize what you don't know. And so I would go to school making sure that I learned what I didn't know. And so my education was very meaningful.
Well, you travel quite a bit now and you attract money to Hawaii. Tell me, what do people in Singapore or Hong Kong or in London or elsewhere in the world think of when they think of Hawaii as an investment destination for their dollars?
So I'm going to be very measured in that statement. First of all, Hawaii is a wonderful place to invest, but when it comes to financial markets and investments, Hawaii is not a primary investment market. I think you go to the gateway cities in the United States. Hawaii is considered a secondary market. It's not very liquid here, in the sense that if you want to get out of the investment, it's not there's not a robust market of buyers or investors that are going to take your place.
So there has to be some escape route, or there has to be a secondary goal to achieve.
Right.
With Hawaii somewhat as a stepping stone or maybe a gateway into the country?
It's more a secondary idea. They want to invest in the United States. They look at the markets. And only if they want to invest in tourism, like hotel or real estate based, this becomes a tremendous market for them. And why is that? And then of course on the retail, you're talking about the mainland coming to Hawaii. We have such, I guess in certain areas, underrepresentation of certain retail sectors that it becomes a big market. Oftentimes, Costco, for example, or these national big chains, when they open in Hawaii, we're starving for their goods because we've been waiting for it, and that's what I mean by underrepresentation. But in my markets, it's been very easy to raise money because we have such a compelling story. It has to do with Hawaii being away from everywhere, but primarily it has to do with our story about land and power.
Yes.
In the state of Hawaii, only 3% of our land mass is designated urban.
And that means that the majority of any landmass on the islands is preserved. We
Conservation
have our
or agriculture.
Aquifer, agriculture, and so forth.
So you're talking about just 3% of our landmass being able to be developed into anything.
We're mostly steep mountains and cliffs with a very narrow band around them for development.
Absolutely. So where it's designated urban or ready to be developed, those become very, very expensive or good investments because the barriers to entry to opening up other landmass areas to be urban designated for development becomes very difficult. So anyone who controls that 3%, and now remember, 3% of the landmass not every part of that land is owned by individual owners. It's the state of Hawaii
Sure.
and the federal government
That's
control
right.
a big chunk of that.
Well, you used a catchphrase a little bit earlier, land and power. And so, of course, you're referring to a book by Dawes and Cooper, which basically said, who has the land has the power. So let me ask you a simple question from an economic point of view. You said that about 3% of the land mass in the islands can be developed or urbanized. And I don't want to get you into trouble if you're ever a DLNR appointee, but do you think we could potentially, without harming the islands, have 3.25% or 3.5%?
Yes, and so I do. I think it needs to be done, but see, state of Hawaii is one of the very few states in the United States, if not the only state, that controls the land use zoning in the sense of land use zoning
the whole
designations.
state, centrally controlled.
Through the Land Use Commission.
That's right.
And so, whereas all the other places in the United States, or majority of them, are controlled through municipalities. I think when the Constitution was put into place and created a Land Use Commission, the municipalities were not as strong. They weren't as evolved as they are today with their own zoning codes and their planning rules and their own commissions. And so the state, as the big brother, thought they had to make sure that they control the growth through these designations. The Land Use Commission, in its way, controls any designation of urbanization. And as you can see with examples of Koa Ridge and what's happening in Ho'opili, that it's very, very difficult to urbanize. Even the areas that were considered to be in the urban path, it's taken now over a dozen years, if not 15 years, to even get them to a point of municipality rezoning beyond the state level. What does that do for offshore investors when they're looking at Hawaii?
Right.
Is that I want to control that land, because now then with that land becomes very valuable, because the barriers to entry is so difficult. That is the investment that's worthwhile. It's like gold, right? You can't replicate it. So we're doing it to ourselves in the sense that we're controlling so much that our land has become so valuable.
Now, that's right.
The land cost is so significant to develop housing and anything else. Our offices, our retail centers becomes that much more expensive.
What's the median price of a home now on Oahu?
It's over $700,000.
And this is a small, maybe 1,200 square foot, 3-bedroom home. It could be fairly old, but the prices are just incredible compared to the rest of the mainland. And so part of that problem, the price being so high, is because of the scarcity of land you're talking about.
Absolutely.
Would you say this is somewhat an artificial scarcity? Because if we could have 3.5% development or 4% development, would that allow us to have such an increase in supply that prices could come down a bit?
Yes, but I'm not advocating for more urban lands. I'm advocating for those areas that were intended to be urban path.
But you bring the analysis, and that is we're dealing with a scarcity that we've actually created.
We created ourselves, that's right.
And we have a single policy for the entire state. Now, that must strike many of your potential investors as a little bit strange. It's not the typical area in which they invest, in which they can get greater control by working directly with the local government. They have to deal with the state government and all the politics of the state government.
That's right. So the zoned lands become that much more scarce and expensive, and therefore, what's available for housing, it just creates artificial increases in pricing because it's not available. So what I advocate is let's control the supply side. It may not be urbanizing all the land areas, but it may be densifying the areas that are already urban.
Now, when we talk about that, you're really dealing with looking at different pockets of land, different regions where we could become more dense in terms of an urban center, such as in Kaka'ako, and leaving other lands fairly open without even touching the scenery, really. Do you think that a lot of people think that development means just urbanizing all over the place?
Yeah, so there's misconception that everybody wants to develop everywhere, and that's not the case. I mean, we have really good planners and we have very responsible developers who look at the future and wants to do the right thing.
Well, this morning I was reading the Star Advertiser, and there was a letter to the editor, and you've probably read hundreds of letters like this. It's called "Greed is Driving the Housing Shortage." And let me read just a little bit. Hawaii's inflated housing market is driven by out-of-state investors. rich speculators and greedy developers like Christine Camp. No, it didn't say that, but I'm sure you've heard that. And it isn't only the poor who can't afford housing, but also a growing number of the middle class. And it goes on about how this isn't democratic and so forth. What are your thoughts about this kind of attitude here in Hawaii?
And that's why we need more education. Just think about all of the planning process that are involved in developing a property, even the ones that are zoned.
That's right.
I mean, see, look at what's happening in Kaka'ako. It was planned for high rises, and yet they're fighting high rises. It's planned for affordable housing as well as market housing. And when they try to build affordable housing, nobody wants it in their backyard. They don't want that view to be blocked. I mean, so we're doing it to ourselves again. So if you're, strangling the available resources to build more inventory, whether it's high-end housing or low-end housing, the more supply that's out there, it's just going to flood the market with more product. It will affect the value of the housing. It will bring it down if you allow the supply to meet the demand.
Now, this is a very simple economic principle called supply and demand. Increasing the supply with continuous demand brings down the price. Now, the thing is, that works beautifully in theory, but how do you think the government weighs in terms of affecting that? Our government tries to manage in terms of zoning and the land use, the percentage available, as well as tries to manage the amount of affordable housing. How's our government doing? Put you in a tough place here as a developer.
I think we have some really good leaders. We can do a lot more. We need to help the leaders who see our way, champion our causes, and so it's a two-way street. We need to help them understand, and we also need to help the leaders voice their concerns. We can't just let them be out there.
Sure, and a lot of times political leaders are under a huge amount of pressure from various interest groups and the public. We've seen that in Kaka'ako, not to mention campaigns and so forth and their funding. But when we take a look at a microcosm, the 30-meter telescope up on a little piece of real estate Mauna Kea on the Big Island, I'm wondering what the world thinks, because you described earlier a process in Kaka'ako where a master plan was laid, where there were approvals done, testimony from the public that came to bear upon that. Well, I thought that's what we did for 9 years on the telescope.
Yes, I mean, let's reframe this issue. You come to a place, say you'd like to build on a piece of property, and you go to the government and you talk to them. They say, here's the rules, here's the procedure, follow it. And then you go out to the community, ask them what they want, give them everything they want. You go through every step. Ninth year, you finally get your permit, and you're ready to construct, and then you're stopped, and the governor doesn't protect you in the due process.
You even had the Office of Hawaiian Affairs sign off a few years ago as well.
Everybody who needed to sign off signed off, and then all of a sudden you're put to a stop.
Now, how does this look to potential offshore investors?
Exactly. I'm not taking sides here. I'm just kind of seeing it from a neutral party. It sounds to me like we're a third world country. Think about those communist countries where they said, investors come, we'll help you build our manufacturing, build our oil fields. And then when it became successful, they nationalized and then kicked those companies out.
Well, that sounds
How are
like
we different?
A great quote you've given the news media on the TMT. We're a third world country. But you care deeply about being able to attract offshore investment. And maybe you can, before we close this first segment of the program, define what we mean by offshore investment. What exactly is that?
In my view, offshore, because we're an island, offshore investment to me is when monies come from outside of our shores. So it's outside of Hawaii. It could be from US, it could be from Canada, it could be from Asia. But even if it came from US, the source of those monies are from everywhere.
Aloha.
It could be a fund that's raising money from the Saudis. It could be from a Chinese fund out of California or Canada. You don't know where it's really global.
Why do we need money from outside of Hawaii? I know it's a very simple question, but I think it's worth asking and worth answering. Why do we have to go outside of Hawaii to raise the money we need to have the kind of life we want to live here?
Because we're no longer a manufacturing company. We only have one active sugar plantation.
So we don't
and that's in Maui.
manufacture.
We don't factory. We don't have
factories.
exports. Our export is
export.
really tourism.
Mhm.
And to have significant investment here has to come from elsewhere to support us. Without the federal government funding into our economy, we can't survive. Or have the government that we have now and have the support systems that we have now. Without the offshore investors coming in and putting in hundreds of millions of dollars, billions into our economy, we don't have enough money to grow the economy for our growing population.
Yet there are people who say, whether it's on a big scale, like the Next Era merger with Hawaiian Electric, or whether it's on a small scale, like a billionaire from Beijing buying a Kaka'ako penthouse and so forth, people sometimes say, we lose control. We lose control of our INA. We become colonized by this. What's your short answer to that?
I think that our whole world is globalized. And I don't think it's a matter of control. The control happens when we put rules and laws into place.
So there's a way to do it. It's not
There's a way to
either
do
or.
it.
We're going to
But
take
you have to make it very clear.
We're going to talk a little bit about that then. What conditions make it possible to succeed in bringing offshore investment to Hawaii? My guest today is Christine Camp, President and CEO of the Avalon Group, a group that has been very successful in attracting to Hawaii offshore investment. We're going to be right back after this short break. Don't go away. You're watching Ehana Kako on the ThinkTech Hawaii Broadcast Network.
Aloha, I'm Hunter Hevelin, host of Sustainable Hawaii here at ThinkTech Hawaii. You can tune in every week on Thursday at 2 p.m. to see interviews with sustainability professionals from around the state and even further abroad, learning about activities with water management, food security, waste management, and a whole host of other fascinating opportunities to get engaged with making a greener island. So if you're interested in making the transition from consuming individuals to communities of producers, check us out every Thursday.
Hi, aloha. My name is Chris Leatham, and I host a show called The Economy and You. The show plays every Wednesday at noon, and on my show, I bring on guests who are interested or working in the technology space. And so I'd like you to come and watch the show and learn with me about all the sort of exciting things that we're doing in Hawaii to build and grow our economy ecosystem. So I'd like to say aloha, and I look forward to seeing you on the show. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jay Fidel. That's Ted Ralston. You know, Ted is the host of Where the Road Leads. It shows every Friday from 4 to 5 p.m. It's about technology. It's about how people collaborating and solve problems with modern technology. It's where the road leads. We all know that. We should all be listening. Join us there, 4 to 5 p.m. every Friday. Now, what about that do you agree with?
All of it.
I knew he'd say that. Aloha. Say aloha.
Aloha.
Good.
Welcome back to Ehana Kako on the ThinkTech Hawaii Broadcast Network. I'd like to say at the outset, I'm just tremendously grateful to producer Jay Fidel and the entire talented team of volunteers and workers at the ThinkTech studio. Together, we produce about 30 to 35 hours of original content from downtown Honolulu, and it goes out across the world, and you can see any of that on thinktechhawaii.com. Ehana Kako, that's what we say at the Grassroots Institute. It's based upon a venerable saying in Hawaii, e pule kako, which means let's pray together. Well, ehana kako means let's work together. Let's work together to build a better government, a better economy, and a better society. Think of the alternative, not working together. Then nothing happens. You know, somebody who makes people or creates the conditions for working together is with us in our studio today, and that's Christine Camp. And that's what she has done in terms of bringing what we used to call factors of production together in order to build her company, the industry, and something good for the state of Hawaii. Christine, I just really respect what you've done in your own career and in terms of attracting offshore investment to Hawaii. Earlier you said Avalon over the last 15 years or so has generated about $350 million of investment. About how much of that has come from outside of Hawaii?
About half of that.
And of that amount, how much of that has come from non-U.S. companies?
Oh, excuse me. About 90% of that came from the offshore, and about half of it came from U.S.
So at least 300 million has come from outside of Hawaii, and about half from the U.S. and half from other countries and so forth. So you've been on the road quite a bit selling Hawaii to the world.
That's right.
You're like a miniature Hawaii Travel Visitors Bureau, or an investment bureau.
Well, you know, it's not hard selling our location. Everybody wants to visit Hawaii.
Sure.
Hawaii has such a great reputation for a destination place. So it's not that hard. And then when we tell the compelling story of how, you know, in my industry, it's about real estate.
That's right.
How hard it is to secure entitlements for the land to develop. The lands that have been entitled is very compelling for someone to invest in. It becomes fairly risk-free for a lot of people.
That's right. It becomes a very secure investment, something which value will not go down. So that's talking about your own industry in terms of real estate development and so forth. But you're playing a growing role as a leader in our community, so you care also about other industries. What's the investment climate for tech industries or other kinds of industries where you need highly skilled workers and so forth here? It's a little bit different, isn't it?
Yeah, it is different. So when I look at my industry, which is real estate and construction, you know, it's very cyclical, and everyone understands that it's cyclical. So when private industry is on a cycle, then we hope that the public sector will pick up those construction workers to do public infrastructure projects. Unfortunately, where the rail is right now, it's competing head-on in a heated market. But the whole idea is that, you know, we understand the real estate cycle no matter where we are. And just like economy has its cycles. And so right now it's a heated market, and we're creating significant amount of high-paid jobs, union jobs. And, you know, it's creating an industry, or it's expanding an industry that really builds upon this community here. And that's when you have construction. You also have support services like legal and escrow and you know, appraisal and engineering and architecture and supplies, warehousing, what have you, retail, food industry. You know, everything gets supported through new construction activity, and that's what real estate development can do. You bring money from elsewhere, creating jobs that can only be satisfied here, and those jobs are paying income taxes, general excise taxes, property taxes, and so it's generating more revenues for the community to be reinvested into our infrastructure in our schools. So to me, those are kind of investments that are very significant. It's different from when you're buying a real estate, you know, maybe it's already developed, it's generating income, and someone comes in and invests in it. Then it's not creating new jobs, but what it's done was maybe provide a more conveyance tax, maybe liquidity. The person who sold the property can now invest in other things, other ventures. More jobs could be created from that sales proceeds. So we look for those types of opportunities when we say the economy is growing. But, you know, it's not just construction industry. I think about when offshore investment came and saved Central Pacific Bank. In 2008, right. Central Pacific Bank had investments in California. And, you know, with subprime lending and those issues that happened in California, the bank got swept into it, and they lost about $1 billion of net worth. And to save the bank from closing, and when I think about saving the bank, I'm thinking about saving everyone's deposits that, well, you know, those are insured, so they're going to be saved anyway. But it's about the jobs. It's about the spaces that they occupy, the rents that they pay,
that's right.
The income taxes that the employees pay. You know, it's about our communities where they're represented and having choices for those people who live in these communities that have maybe 4 banks instead of 3 banks. And offshore investment allowed that to happen. The bank was able to raise $325 million. $300 million of it came from New York.
Well, isn't it part of our problem that, like it or not, the population of our islands is fixed at some point in terms of sustainability? Whereas other centers across the world and the United States are not isolated out in the middle of the Pacific. Los Angeles goes on forever, Chicago goes on, New York goes on. Centers like Hong Kong have a mass, a population which just dwarfs what we have here. So in many ways, the population to sustain certain markets, the population with which to provide the labor force, the skilled labor force, and so forth, isn't here. It would seem that we are inextricably in need of offshore investment for our capital.
That's right. And we are limited in our growth, not just because of our land use policies, but population growth.
That's right.
We don't have a fast-growing population. And in fact, we're at full employment in any given society, you know, when you're at 5% unemployment, you're at full employment. We're way below that. We're, I think, at 4%.
Yes.
And in Honolulu, it's slightly less than that. So we're at full employment. Anyone who wants to work is working. Who is able to work, they're working. And so how do you grow an economy when you have that? You're going to need to have influx of people coming in. Economies like Hong Kong, you know, when you have influx of people that are coming in from China, you always have a source of labor that can build up that economy. We don't have that. So we are going to be limited in our growth, and we need offshore investments to kickstart up.
We somewhat alluded to a couple of factors that are very important for attracting offshore investment. One of them is the rule of law. Investors need to know that this isn't going to be like Beijing in the 80s, where they could get expropriated and they could lose their factory because the government has a whim to do that.
It's happening in Hawaii, unfortunately,
No,
with Super Ferry and with TMT.
That's right.
The rule of law and, you know, the procedures have to be followed, and the government has to stand behind it.
But somehow public sentiment pushes our policy leaders to insert themselves into some of these controversial events. How does that look to those who are outside of Hawaii, who really want the government to be there to say, this permit was issued, you have a right to proceed?
Yes, the rule of law. I think the government has to be strong enough to stand behind the rules and the laws that it has written. And we can't be bullied by the vocal minority. And I'm not saying it's just TMT, but it's about all the issues.
Sure.
What ends up happening is that the vocal minority comes up, and oftentimes a lot of these voices are not even from our own communities.
Now, there's something else that is needed too, and you're probably very familiar with this because of the number of development projects you've led. There has to be the sense of what actually I've called ehana kako, let's work together. You're bringing together various interests, and we have such diversity in our community. We've got voices coming from the left and the right, and we've got political factors and so forth. How does one build consensus amongst the parties involved, ranging from government to business to the community? What are some of the keys to building consensus in order to allow a development project to go forward?
I think you have to identify stakeholders, true stakeholders who are truly affected by what you do in that community, and get their feedback early on, so that what comes out of those meetings is that you have meaningful dialogue and an opportunity to do something before the true action happens. And so before anything truly gets invested, it's about getting everyone together to get their voices heard.
Now, you used the word true stakeholders, meaning that there must be some stakeholders that aren't really true stakeholders that get inserted into the process at some point.
Well, it's the vetting process of who is truly affected and who is just who has an ideology that needs to be vocalized in certain areas. And so we have to discern from those voices to to identify who are truly affected in that community and for that action.
There's a sensitive issue I want to ask you, not that anything else hasn't been sensitive and so forth. Star Advertiser did something which is really quite common. It's not all that unusual in Hawaii. It happens to be the way things are done. Star Advertiser did a piece in which it gave a visual of all of the towers that had been approved for Kaka'ako. And then it put next to each tower the developers' names and contributions to the then governor, under whom it was approved and so forth. What kind of role does campaign contributions play in the development scene in Hawaii, and is it a positive one?
I don't think it's so much that the developers have a role in the campaign contributions. What ends up happening is that the politicians are seeking support.
Sure.
And the developers are out there making money from the community, and they have the wherewithal to be able to contribute to those who have similar ideologies or similar views. And so I don't think that the developers are trying to mold their decision. It's just a contribution like anybody else. They have a stake and they're able to contribute, and it's a free country.
Who are using their dollars to vote.
Who's using their dollars to vote. But supporting the candidates that are very, who saying things that are meaningful and who they're happy about the actions that have been taken. But when you look at the contributions, I mean, you know, you can say anything for any industry, whether it's banking or whether it's legal, or you know, look at the personal injury lawyers and how are they contributing to some of the legislators
So in a
that
sense,
support, you know, or
right.
oppose tort reform.
So perhaps the business agents are acting as they would in a free market, using the means they have in order to influence. So we really have to make sure that we have the right kind of policy government leaders in place, people who have integrity. We're going to come back after a quick break. I'm Keli'i Akina with the Grassroots Institute interviewing Christine Camp, talking about the investment climate here in Hawaii. When we come back, we'll have our final segment, so don't go away. I'm sure you're going to want to see it.
Hi, I'm Ethan Allen. I host Likeable Science on ThinkTech Hawaii, and I do this because I care about science literacy in Hawaii. I want to spread the understanding that science is a vital and interesting part of everyone's life. I want to make sure the broadest possible spectrum of people understand the beauty and the value of science and realize that science plays out each and every day of their lives. I want you to understand that science is fun. So we bring onto this show each week guests who are scientists, from astronomers to zoologists, and we talk about what they do and how they do it. But most importantly, we talk about why you should care about their work, why you should see that their work has value and impact on your life. So I hope you'll join us Fridays, 1 p.m. here on ThinkTech Hawaii. You can watch us via live stream. You can watch us recorded on Olelo, and you can see us each week. We hope you'll join us.
Welcome back to Ehana Kako, a weekly program on the ThinkTech Hawaii Broadcast Network. At the Grassroots Institute, we believe that we can work together to have a better economy, a better government, and a better society. And there are certain principles that aren't political principles. They're principles that can be held regardless of party line, regardless of orientation toward faith or toward business, toward anything. And there's simply these three very good ones. Number one, let's support the rule of law and individual liberty. Number two, let's let the market work. Not an absolute free market with no regulation, but one where there's common sense regulation that doesn't get in the way of businesses. And number three, let's keep our government accountable. Keep government focused on the things government should do and allow business to do the things business should do, and keep government limited to those things and accountable at all times. I have always found people in support of those principles, and they help to build a better economy here in the state of Hawaii, and that's what we stand for at the Grassroots Institute. Today, talking with Christine Camp is very valuable to me because she, in her own persona, helps to show Hawaii what we need more of. We need more aggressiveness in bringing investment here to our state. But we also need savvy in terms of knowing how to work with multiple factors, stakeholders, and people. So in her role, she's combined all of these things as the president of Avalon Development Group. Christine, as we close, I want to ask you to apply some of the lessons you've learned to the broader economy. I know that there are certain advantages when you are taking out pictures of real estate in Hawaii and showing them and saying, would you like to come and invest in this? And it's secure, and it's always going to be there, and it's always going to be going up in value. But you've done a lot behind the scenes to make it happen. It's not just opening up a picture book. There are reasons people come to invest through your influence. What are some of the things that need to be done to attract investors, perhaps to other industries, such as high tech?
We need to invest in our university system, our education. Without the education, we can't have the high-tech industries or any high-end industries, the high-paying jobs. And that's going to be very concerning. Our average house price is significantly higher than it should be when you compare it to the average income.
That's right.
Because we're still a service sector job industry. I mean, you talk about the tourism, retail, you know. So if we need to get out of that mode, we really need to look at attracting more industries. And the way to do that is to making sure that we invest in our education, our university system. I am so sad every time I see that university system is short on their budget for their programs, their cancer research program and the medical school. These are the areas that are supposed to be job generators, economic generators that are going to give us hope for the future. And we're giving up on that. We can't give up on that. So from private sector, what the government could do is to get out of the way, help the education system become more robust so that we can keep our young people, so that even if those who didn't go to University of Hawaii can come back here and tap on those resources that could be available from the University of Hawaii to start their ventures or continue growing their ventures here. I have a hard time finding talented individuals for my company, and I hear that story all the time. We're at full employment at less than 5% unemployment ratio. So we need to have talented individuals here in Hawaii.
And you talk about globalization. Certainly for the job market, for talented young men and women, we have globalization. Patty and I have 4 children. One of them is still in high school, but the 3 who've already graduated from mainland colleges are off, and maybe sometime after they earn enough for their first mortgage, they might consider visiting Hawaii again. But you know that story. Any thoughts about what we can do to reverse the brain drain? In addition to building a more robust university, we're going to have places people can afford.
That's right. In conjunction with that, it's about policies that streamline permitting to generate more housing and add supply to all of our housing stock so that our cost of living goes down. And third, looking at targeted industries and providing tax platforms, permit processing efficiencies, government support to bring these economies or bring these businesses back to Hawaii. Act 221, I know that it was an expensive venture for the state of Hawaii.
And you're talking about tax credits in order to do solar and high tech, actually,
and
much
solar.
more, everything.
We just need a lot more of that. What I've seen is in my travels is that the municipalities that have been most successful in retaining as well as bringing in new businesses are when the government rolled up their sleeves and said, please come, this is what we can do for you.
Well, you used the word municipalities here.
That's right.
And you're talking about a different level of government. Here in Hawaii, we have one state government that, whether it's education, and in some cases the labor market, or whatever it may be, land use management, it has only one system. Do you think that where there are competing counties, municipalities, and so forth, that you generate a kind of free market competition that ultimately gives greater options?
Absolutely. I think our municipalities should be the final say on its land use designations.
Well, here in many cases they seem to make a lot of sense because you've got island groups.
That's right, and we're separated by landmass. You know, education, I think we're starting to go the right path. I think the unions needs to still work with us. I don't think we have enough teaching hours in our schools. But you know, having a centralized system makes us much more efficient. So I don't mind seeing that. I do mind cutting down on our teaching hours. I think our teachers need to step up a little bit and help our public school students.
When you talk about efficiency and a central education system, it's one thing to be able to buy collectively as a co-op, so to speak. You've got the economies of scale. But I would think that there are some things that should be rooted at the local level as well, especially when it comes to real estate. I know the main
home rule.
That's right.
Right.
You know, mainland we have something a little bit different. In most municipalities or counties, as I understand it, property taxes are raised and administered locally and used directly for schools, so that people, when they sell houses, are talking about schools that the locals can influence. But here, the money goes into a big pot and then into the school system. Do you think that affects the climate a little bit in terms of deciding to move here if you are an engineer from Silicon Valley?
It's a big deciding factor. Our public school systems need a little bit of work, but there's some really bright spots. Some of the schools are doing very well. So it's really about standardization. I like the fact that they're standardized in a centralized way. I just think that they need more teaching hours to help the kids. You know, our state right now, we have the highest concentration of private schools in the nation. Our state has the highest concentration of private schools, and so we're going to have haves and have-nots by seeing kids who graduate from public school versus private schools. I'm a product of a public school system, and I'm very proud of it. I've had a great education, but that's before the No Child Left Behind laws were out there.
Right.
Those kids who are bright or even just along the middle of the way, they're really losing out. And I think we need to find some way to help those kids that are just in the middle, who don't need a lot of help, but they need attention. And the school systems need to do a lot more than that, what they're doing now.
When you look to the political arena, to our governor, to legislators and so forth, what do you think they can do to really help bring us into the 21st century kind of economy that we need to be, with the right kind of investment and the right kind of regulation and so forth, and a place that is becoming more and more prosperous than less? What would you like to see government do? I might be asking you, what would you do when you run for governor?
And I'm not running for governor, and I'm not running for any government seats. I think that they have a very big challenge. Obviously, there's some really good civic-minded people in office. They're trying their best. It's just, you know, we have a huge system, and the way to break it down is evaluating our Constitution in a lot of ways.
People used to talk a lot about corporate ethics and the duty that corporations have to the general public. Have you articulated something like this at Avalon, the role that you want to play in terms of bringing about a better public policy making and better service to humanity?
Yes. I would leave it at that. We have to ensure that in our leadership we're always thinking about civic-mindedness, because we're not an island. What we do matter, and what others do matter.
Well, we have a cue here to take a look at our tweet. Brittany, TM, says this: I wonder if Christine Camp can explain Avalon's interacts with true stakeholders in this situation. You want to take a 30-second stab at that?
In which situation?
Permit violations? Sashi, can you help me out a bit here? She's asking a little bit about identifying true stakeholders from those who are not the true stakeholders.
How does a developer get permits when a design violates an agreement?
Okay, so how does a developer get permits when a design violates an agreement?
Very specific to the project that we developed, and all I can say is that we met all of the intended roles. I don't think that people fully understand. What ends up happening is that there's this myth that gets circulated that developers violated the rules or permit agreements. But when you look at the agreements, which I did, our agreements are specific to all of the agreements that were written and signed. So I no longer have anything to say about that. The project is in construction, and it's in a much smaller footprint than it was originally designed for, and we're very proud of it, because we're now bringing in, instead of $1 million luxury housing, we're bringing units that are going to be rented to people who make average income and low income, and it's rentals, and it's very sorely needed. And by adding 269 rental units in a community where it's 90% owner-occupied,
sure,
to me that's significant for that community. Now it gives people a choice to come in and rent instead of having to buy a place in Hawaii Kai. So I think this question is related to my specific project in Hawaii Kai, and I'm very proud that I can bring rental units into a community.
Well, thank you very much for your tweet, and that ends our program for today. Christine, thank you for being here today. You've made a complex issue a lot more simple, and you've stated very clearly a strong case as to why we have to go out there and get the offshore investments. I want to thank you very much for doing that for Hawaii, and look forward to seeing what happens in the years ahead. Aloha. My guest today, Christine Camp, President, CEO of Avalon Development Group, one of many businesses that are working for a better Hawaii. I hope you've enjoyed today's program. We'll be back next week on Ehana Kako on the ThinkTech Hawaii Broadcast Network. Until then, I'm Keli'i Akina with the Grassroots Institute. Aloha.